Okay, so this is just going to be a short little tutorial video on showing how I set up this seamless loop in Blender using meshes as particles. So it's pretty straightforward and it can be done pretty quickly, so let's just hop in. So when we open up Blender, I'm just going to press A and delete everything, and I'm going to press Shift A and add a plane. I'm going to press S and 8 to scale this plane up to 8 units. Control A and apply all transforms. Now the basis of these looping animations is that I want to take a camera and move it from one end of this plane and then to the other end, and then we're going to duplicate whatever is inside of this square and just duplicate it out a bunch of times. So I'm going to add a camera, press Alt R to clear rotation, RX and 90. I'm just going to move it up a little bit on the Z, and then here in our transforms, in the Y value, I'm going to set this to -8 so that it's at the very end of our plane. On frame 0, just add a keyframe, and then I'm going to set the duration of our animation to 120 frames. Go and make this 30 FPS, and go back to our camera, and on frame 120, I'm just going to set this to the opposite, so this will be 8. So now if we press play, it's just gonna go from one end to the other and then start over. Cool. So now we're gonna start adding the particles, and I'm just gonna add a random mesh, so I'll just use my logo for this. So just bring this in, scale it up a little bit, move it off to the side. Now, click on our plane, go to our particle settings, add a particle system. I'll call this cloud logo. You can call it whatever your object is or whatever you want. And the first thing I'm going to do is change this from emitter to hair. Now down here in our render tab, we're going to change it from render as path to render as object. And then under here where it says instance object, you can click on it and select your thing, or you can just eyedropper it and pick. Now I'm going to make sure I check object rotation here, and it's going to be like a little funky. How to fix that is we just go to the advanced tab, and then under rotation, which you get after checking advanced, we're going to change orientation axis to none, and that will just bring it back to how it was previously. Cool. So I'm just going to bring this number down to something like 150, maybe 200 is good, and we can just start playing with here the scale and scale randomness here. So I'll just turn my scale randomness all the way up. I'll keep my scale somewhere around like 0.1, 0.15 is okay, maybe a little smaller. 0.1 is good. Now all of these are kind of like stuck to the plane right now. They're all on the same level. And how we get this height variation is we want to take our object and tab into edit mode. If you don't have everything selected, just press A really quick, and then I'm going to press G and Z, and we can just move it up. And here you'll see they start to spread out a little bit. Now it's important to know that if you do not have your scale randomness up, then the distribution will continue to be flat. So I've yet to kind of find a better way around this, but for now this is okay. So I'm just going to get these spread out how I like. I think that's fine. Also, you'll notice that when you do this, the smaller ones will be at the bottom and the larger ones will be at the top. So you want to take your camera and sort of position it like in the middle, I guess is good. You can also like adjust your focal length and stuff to capture more or less. So now that we have this, I'm going to show you how to add a secondary particle, and it's basically the exact same thing. I'll just use like an icosphere for this or something random. So Shift A, add an icosphere, scale it down, and I'll just move it off to the side really quick. We're gonna do the same thing, so just grab your particle settings, call this sphere, whatever. It's gonna be the icosphere, and then set it to hair, render to object, and then we're gonna select our icosphere. I'll make this a lot less, so 150, up the scale randomness, and then I'm gonna tab into edit mode here. And I forgot to do the rotation, so go to advanced rotation, make sure you check object rotation and set this to none. And G and Z in edit mode to get these distributed. Cool, so now we have two particles that are on the same plane, so you don't need to do more than one plane, and you can add as many objects as you want, as few objects as you want. It doesn't really matter. There's, no limitations here. So what I'm going to do now is just quickly add some materials and change our world background to black. And then here, let's change the name of this to logo. Go into our shader editor and just quickly add some emission materials, and I'll turn on bloom really quick for this. So any color, doesn't matter. And then the same thing with our icosphere, just add a new material, make this white. Cool. Now what we want to do is take this, right click, move to collection, and you can call this particles. Okay. And the reason we instance collect this is just because it saves performance, and it's using this object and just cloning it instead of creating like more meshes. So I'm going to press Shift A, collection instance, and find our particles, and holding Control to snap, I'm just going to snap it to the end of this. And then you can just duplicate this over as many times as you feel, or as many times as you need to get the loop to go properly. So if we go into our camera here, and this is pretty ugly to be honest, but you get the idea, is that it will continue to loop. Now there is a small issue with this right now, and it's that at the end of our loop you see that there's another one that appears out of nowhere, and it's sort of hard. Like, you can duplicate this as many times as you want, and you might still have this issue depending on how far your camera can actually see. So you'll have a new one continue to kind of pop out of nowhere. How we get around this is you want to add some volume. So here I'm just going to press Shift A, add a cube, and I'm going to scale it the exact same way, so S and then 8. And I'm going to drag this into our particles collection so that it just updates all of our other instance collections with this cube. I'm going to go into our shader editor, take the cube, and I'm going to add a principled volume. So press Shift A, add a principled volume, take this and plug it into the volume of our material output. I'm going to make the color black because that is my background color. I'm going to take the density and set this to about 0.1, 0.2. Find that these are pretty good numbers because anything over 0.5 or whatever, you're going to lose a lot. You won't be able to see very far. But basically you can set this to however far you want to hide the stuff in the background. So 0.1, 0.2, I'll do 0.2 for this. Now this should be fixed now, in that you can't see far enough to see the things that are appearing out of nowhere. And you can even, kind of start to delete any extra ones that you don't need to see anymore because of this. And now you have a perfect loop. That's great. So in my example that I showed you, there is some camera shake, and I'll show you how to achieve that. So basically, In your camera keyframes, you need to make sure that you have rotation. So press I and location and rotation, and the same thing on your last keyframe. Now I'm just going to open another tab down here and make this a graph editor. And I'm just going to lock everything that I don't want to touch right now. So we'll just do the X rotation first. If you press N over here in your graph editor, you'll get this side panel for F curves. And you go to modifiers, add a modifier, a noise modifier. Now it's up here. Sometimes you have to kind of like search for it because they're in weird spots. You'll see that we have these kind of lines, and now this is driving the parameter or rotation parameter, and it's pretty insane right now, and it's not nice. So what we can do here is just take the strength down. You can set this to like 0.005 or something really nice and subtle. You can see you get this little jittering, maybe a little bit bigger than that, 0.7 or 8 is nice. And then you can take this value here, which is our scale, and take that and just scale it up a little bit so you get a little wobble here. And you can play with these values to get, you know, whatever you think is nice. And to get it to loop a little better, we're going to restrict the frame range from a start of 1 and end of 120, so that is the duration of our animation. And here, these parameters in and out will kind of determine when it starts and stops, so you can get a better like kind of starting from one value and then ending on the same value. So I'll just make those like that. And now I'm going to do this for every single rotation parameter. I'm not going to do it manually, but you can just copy and paste these. So I'll lock this, go over to this one, paste this modifier, and then do the same thing here. So now we have the same F curve pasted on 3 different values. And you can use this on any value too, so it can be emission, it can be rotation, position, it can be whatever you want. So that is basically it for how to make this. And yeah, hopefully this is useful. And just play around with more things. Oh, one more thing that I actually forgot to mention is when you render it, in this case you can't see it, but sometimes this will happen. When you render this, you might be able to see the plane itself, and you don't want to see that. So if you go to your particle settings and under render, you want to check show emitter. You want to uncheck this box so that it does not show up in your render. And if you don't want to see it in the viewport either, you can go down to viewport display and do the same thing, and it will disappear. So yeah, just so you don't see the plane when you're rendering. Other than that, that is pretty much it for this tutorial. Yeah, go make cool shit.